Day 17, -3 out there. And beautiful morning sunsets coming out here. Yeah, look at that. Another beautiful sunrise, I should say. Looking forward today, but I'm super apprehensive. Today, the structural engineer arrives in about 30 minutes. We're gonna walk around the house and he's gonna show us all this stuff. And I'm really nervous because the house is sold. Who knows what we'll hear. So hopefully he'll give us a good report and hopefully things are not too bad. I have been nervous for weeks and weeks and weeks about this because, of course, we have a lot of issues that seem obvious. And as a North American, I'm not used to cracks in a house, and it makes me feel very uncomfortable. And so, you know, we bit the bullet and we're paying a fair amount of money for him to come out. Really nice guy, English guy, and so that's great for the language. And he's going to take a look around the whole place and tell us an evaluation. So, been super nervous.
This is like a beam going across those two beams, and then you build up, and then you build around those two beams going through, and then you pack again as sort of before the dry pack. Yeah. And then that will hold the floor, so you can take your beams out. Okay. And then fill up the gap. But the builders do that.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's not something. Yeah. Okay. Good. Okay, that's great news. That's literally great news. We just had a great meeting with the structural engineer, and he stayed for a couple hours, saw everything. He told us some things that some good recommendations on 5 or 6 spots. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing catastrophic. In fact, most of them we can do ourselves with some cinder block construction and poles and you know, precast concrete beams and things like that. So super encouraging. The most encouraging was the front. You will remember from an earlier video, if you watch our videos, that we were deeply concerned about the cracks over the corners. And if you look inside the chateau, it seems very much like the middle 2 columns have sunk a little bit. And he says that's entirely possible. This whole thing is built on clay. He said there is a little bit of movement. So, you know, over 160 years, a few cracks, that's not unusual. He said the structure is really good on this guy. You know, an incredible amount of stone, obviously, bearing down. But, you know, the middle 2 may have shifted a little bit over time, but that may have also been quite a long time ago. So there's a couple of things we're going to look at, and I'll walk you through them here, but deeply encouraging. Problem number 1. A couple of the ones right offhand are mostly cosmetic. Now here, we've always been troubled by this. And you can see that there's a bunch of the facade that's sort of fallen off. He says this is largely a cosmetic deal. There is one of those stones that has sagged a bit, so it's smart that he says keep the pipes there for now. He said we could just we could hire a mason to mix up some, lime, the material that's sort of a little bit flexible and lets water come through it, and mix that up with stone. I'm gonna say this wrong, and essentially patch it and put a new facade on it. That would be one option. Or he says the other option is just put a big plant there, which I thought was great. A second issue that was largely cosmetic that honestly I've never really paid attention to is I believe they're called coping stones underneath the gutters. And he says basically water's gotten in there and it's degraded the stone a bit. So he said we could replace the stones, but they probably go a long ways in there. Probably easier again to have some type of patch made, easier to match the color as well. So there's that on 3 sides of the building, but largely cosmetic. But still an issue, and again, you don't want water getting in there, so worth working on. There's been a couple of major structural issues that we've been nervous about, and under the terrace involves one of the main ones. If you've seen our videos, you saw me put up these temporary beams because as we looked at the metal, we realized that some of these metal girders were basically doing nothing. Now, it was good. He came in, took a good look, and he was actually less concerned about this than I was. He says that the stone, the way it's going, first of all, there's several good beams, and apparently the stone is bridging quite well. So there's actually quite a bit of support under it, obviously, these big pillars. Now, he does suggest we work on this and shore it up, and so he suggests we put cinder block wall all the way across here. A stone wall, you would say, and then also another one here, leaving an opening for the door, and then run precast concrete beams across, supporting a few of those. So very doable, not like $100,000. That's really good news. He was more concerned about this guy than I had thought. He says this has dropped a little bit. He says arches are great, but as soon as one part goes, then they can also, you know, fall very quickly. So he says this is good that this pole is here. He says this pole is adequate. He recommended spreading the load out both on the top and the bottom if we're going to stay with the pole, or potentially putting in, again, another stone wall to support the weight. Very doable. Coming into the basement, again, this is the one that's tied to the front facade. He was, he took a good look at these and had some really good points. He said, yeah, he said the wood has definitely been compressed and it's gotten wet, and that has contributed to the sag. Though he also thinks there's an excellent chance that the fact that we have those cracks on the exterior of the front, and again, if you've watched our videos, you've also seen some of those doors are a little bit offset. He said that probably that's these two columns here, and it's quite possible that that happened before someone came and put this in to fix it. He said these could also be stress cracks from too much weight coming down. So the problem may be fixed, but this is also a problem on both sides. And so he recommends, since we don't need this space, he goes, we should just put we should just fill this area up with concrete blocks, cinder blocks, and there's two beams, one on the back and one on the front. And then he suggested putting styrofoam in between so there's no room for water and air and things like that. So, and he actually said we could do this ourselves easily, at least putting the beams in. Now, when you get to the top, it gets a little bit more tricky because you gotta, you know, replace that wood with concrete. And so that's, maybe we'll have to get an expert for that. But he suggested this is very doable. This was the biggest one we were worried about, the facade. And again, we'll do that to both sides, and we'll stay the, you know, we'll prop that up with some good concrete. I mean, the beauty of like huge, massive castles like this is big piles of stone, right? So fairly strong, quite a bit of compression rate. Lots of little things we can do to help the situation out. Notice on these doors, they were built with a bit of a piece of wood that's supposed to deflect the water away, but it's too far back, and so there's a significant crack. And so if we get rain on any kind of angle or splashing, that water can go right down those cracks. So the easy thing for us to do is, you can even see here someone's built a bit of a bigger piece of wood at the bottom, is to install some kind of cover, or I don't know what you call it, a sill plate or a kick plate, to keep the water away. And honestly, these outside two doors we don't even use, so we could honestly seal them up, get some caulking out, and would help for the air, would certainly help keep the moisture out of the basement, which would be a big deal. Like, look at that one, that one's egregious. You can just see right down there, and that water runs right down. By the way, also look at that seal. You can see right through it. So since we don't use these doors, you can almost just screw them together. He also took a good hard look at this one. Now, you know, if you've ever been walking down here, you notice that the bottom half of this wall is gone, and it seems like it's propped up with this little precarious kind of piece of wood, and it looks kind of sketch. But again, it's very thin. It's not really structural, right? Look how thin that is. It's just a dividing wall. And so he said, yeah, it's not a major problem. But he pointed out something I'd missed. He goes, look at that wall's bowing. And as you look at it, you're like, yeah, it is bowing, which means that there's pressure pushing on it. And probably what will happen to this little wall is the same thing that happened to this wall. It'll probably crack at some point. And he goes, the reason for that, now it's not a bearing wall, but if you look up, you've got these beams running across, and it's actually kind of a long span. Like the beams run through there all the way across the hall. And so beams and also steel girders are meant to flex a bit, he says. But what's happened is they've flexed down, and that has caused the wall to bow, and you can also see the crack there pulling away. So suffice it to say, not a serious problem. What we could do, we could take this, we could shore it up temporarily with some poles, and then take that wall out and replace it with a better wall. He also suggested digging a bit of a foundation, you know, if we were to use, for example, a concrete block wall, because that carries a ton of weight. And anytime, and I don't know how much you know about load, I'm actually halfway good with physics. I'm certainly not an engineer or anything like that. But anytime you shorten, you know, the span, you significantly improve the stability. So now, ironically, this wall is also very thin, but there is a beam that rides on top of it that carries some of the weight. But if you look, it's almost like these beams like run long ways across. So easy fix, we'll shorten that distance, and that will help. It's not cosmetic, it is partly structural, but it's not catastrophically structural. I also wanted to know if it would be possible to put a grand piano in this grand salon. And so we came over and took a look, and he wondered if they had even put those metal beams in there to originally support the grand piano. But there's two big, huge metal beams and a fairly short run for the wood. So fairly structurally sound. He thought it shouldn't be a problem. He had a great suggestion. He said, what you should do, he said, because metal beams are built to flex a bit, and so are wooden beams. Incidentally, when you look at the ceiling, you always see all these little cracks, and he said that's actually super normal because the metal's designed to flex, but the plaster doesn't flex. So over time, you know, maybe you get like a centimeter of bow, a little bit of flex, and that will crack the plaster, but it's not a major structural issue. Now, he said if you want to put a piano up here, what he would recommend is taking a fairly thin piece of wood, like a 2x4, but thinner, and run it tight underneath that beam. Then move the piano in and see how much the wood bows, because if the wood bows, that vertical support, if it bows, that shows that the metal beam is flexing down. Does that make sense? If we put a bunch of weight up there, then it'll push the beam down. If the beam's stable and doesn't move, then the wood will continue to be completely straight. But if the wood starts to bend a little bit, then we kind of can figure out how much that beam is flexing. And if the beam's flexing a ton, we could easily just run one of those telescoping metal pole supports and we'd be fine. So great answer there. Nice to be in this room again. Boy, I miss the students. This room is such a beautifully functional room. The kitchen. He did catch a few things that we didn't catch, which is the joy of having an engineer, somebody that is trained. He sees things we don't see, and he noticed that the wall is flexing down a little bit. You can see that crack up there. And if you take a look up, somebody's opened it up, so they saw this was a problem. There's supposed to be two beams, and one of them looks like it's got wood rot. So what we need to do is get up there and take a look, and then either add some additional beams to support it or some other system. It's not a huge problem, but it's a problem. You can see that they've had the exact same problem. Now this corner here, the last one I just showed you in the kitchen, this is the opposite side of the chateau. So we're kind of on the two corners of the front terrace, and they've had the same issue. Perhaps water's gotten in there, beams have sagged a bit, and they supported it with these metal braces. So lots of good ways to solve this one. We had time to walk around the attic, and he said actually the beams up there look pretty good. He did find a couple that maybe need some work. We were concerned about the staircase. You can see that is lifted fairly significantly. And if you're down here, you can also tell that, I'm not sure you'll see it on the video, but the floor is a little bit unlevel here. There's some spots that are high and low. And he said, yeah, that makes sense. Basically, it's just there's a tremendous amount of weight coming down on the staircase. To me, this was actually quite encouraging. He said, like, if you look at the structure of the staircase, there's no support, so it's kind of supporting itself around the corner. He said what he recommended was we should take a look at the spots that look like cracks, and I'll show you another one here, coming around the corner. This is the one that bothers Leslie. You can see it's kind of shifted over there. And he says we should keep watching it. A lot of times what they'll do is they'll put two pieces of tape over a crack, and then they'll line them up so that there's a line in between them. And then if the crack is moving, over time you'll see that the distance increases. So that was his suggestion, to keep watching it and see if it's moving. And if it's not moving, we're good. If it does move, eventually you might have to work on the staircase, which would be complicated because you'd have to take things apart and put them back together. Leslie had also wondered about the baseboards here. You can see if you look, she went and filled them the other year and painted them, but then she noticed that they continued to crack over time. And so she wondered about the cause of that, and he took a look, and I'm not sure you can see it with the window closed, but he pointed out that the flashing has pulled away a little bit from the house, and it's possible that water's gotten in there and that it's swollen it. So we just need to fix that flashing and caulk it. And then perhaps that would issue. It's a small issue, but you know, everything matters. Everything helps. So honestly, a lot of really good news. By the way, this was fun. He came into this room and stopped and said, wow. He said, I think his quote was, he had not been in a chateau with such a beautiful room. So that's cool. Obviously the fancy chateau around France have some more beautiful rooms than this, but for a little privately owned chateau, he said this was amazing. Truly an encouraging day. I know I was watching another Chateau video. I don't watch a lot of them, but the other day YouTube was suggesting a video and I started watching, and the Chateau owner was having some structural issues and was getting huge quotes, like 25,000, 50,000, all these huge quotes to fix stuff. And so I was really scared about today. But I mean, we're not, and again, some folks can probably just write a check and fix stuff, but we've got to be careful with our money. And so if we were going to hear about problems that were $100,000, it was going to be basically like, well, we're just going to have to live with that. And so I'm super pleased that the problems we have can be solved, either by regular builders coming in and putting some, good concrete walls and supports, or even potentially for some of these problems, we can do it ourselves. You know, some of the aesthetic stuff, we'll probably try to find a good mason eventually, but for the structural stuff, we'll get some supports in there. So truly an encouraging day, a very encouraging day. I'm thankful to God for today. When we were planning today, I realized that mentally I was going to need some time following the structural engineer, either time to celebrate mentally or to grieve. And so we decided to go out for lunch after and just kind of debrief a little bit. And so we went to a little town, beautiful restaurant, Le Brocard, just south of Beaugé. Highly recommended. Cute little location right next to a church. From the outside, it looks very simple, but so quaint on the inside. It's going to be hard to hear us because we were trying to be respectful and quiet, but try to watch and enjoy.
It is so cute in here, you guys. There's old beams.
It's really cool. It's a really beautiful restaurant. Yeah, very nice. And the menu today is beef bourguignon.
Yay. And a beautiful old fireplace. And they took us through all these hallways to get here. And when you walked in, it was like this beautiful little pub with a fireplace. So cute.
Yeah. It's a beautiful little entree buffet. Really nicely put together. Lots of cool, interesting things. Really quite a delightful entree. Isn't that nice?
So sometimes when you're visiting places and you don't know the cultural cues of what you're supposed to do, we have 2 glasses on our table and we're not
sure which one to use, so we're just gonna wait and watch the next table. This is so great. Look at this beef bourguignon and potatoes. Doesn't that look terrific, Beth? And Leslie has a really good beef bourguignon, so she's always happy to try someone else's too.
It's really nice. This is the perfect meal. I was freezing this morning. It has mushrooms. It has carrots. Perfectly cooked fall off the bone meat.
Yeah.
And of course, wonderful mashed potatoes.
Beautiful. So this is cool. It's dessert time, and they came up with a cheese plate, and I think that's what we're getting. So we're going to try to figure out which cheeses to eat, and that might be the end of the meal, or maybe there's still dessert. I don't know. Yep. Fantastic. Trying a little brie, whatever this is, and then this is great too. Yum. This is a wonderful meal. We had a cheese course. Leslie, what did you get?
It's like that chocolate tart. You called it something else, I don't know. Chocolate and then tart. You have an île flottante.
Check this out.
Floating
Literally
islands.
floating. Île flottante is super cool. Now, it's not really my kind of dessert, but it's kind of like marshmallow. Yeah.
It's meringue.
Is it meringue? It tastes like marshmallow.
Meringue and a creme anglaise.
And a creme anglaise with a puddingy sauce. That was incredible. That was a 4-course meal for $15, where we had an entree buffet, an incredible beef bourguignon, and mashed potatoes, and then a cheese course, and then desserts.
I know. And probably you could have had coffee too.
Yeah, you think it was included?
Probably.
Probably was. Is this open?
So, you know what's great about these little towns? This is a really small little town, kind of like what we live in Ishmire.
Mm-hmm.
They have these beautiful little churches. The Marie, the mayor's office is right there. But check this out. How cute is it?
And are the doors open?
Let's go see if it's open.
Usually churches are open. Yeah. Okay.